and no children's ministry, so we're all going to learn what it's like to be a family. All right. If you're a visitor here today, and we'd love for you to fill out one of our connection cards and drop it in the offering box or in the basket on your way out. And that'd be great, so we can follow up with you as well. And if you're just joining us today for the first time, or you've missed a few weeks because it's summertime and there's lots of fun things to do, we're coming up on the end of a sermon series that we're doing here at the Commonplace on Psalm 23. David wrote this, King David, later in his life as he reflected on God's faithfulness to him. And he thought to himself, what is the best way to describe what God is like to me? And he remembered his own life as a shepherd. And out of that, he said, you know what, a great illustration of what God is like to me is that he is a good shepherd to me as well. Are you going to swap them out? Okay. And so, we read Psalm 23, possibly one of the most famous Psalms that we know. And we've been illustrating this through David's life. And so today, the passage we want to look at is this passage here. When David writes, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And we're going to kind of discuss what is it that David means by this. And I think there's two very viable applications or interpretations of this. But before we get there, I just want to ask if you've ever inherited a mess, all right? Like maybe you took a job as a boss or moved into a leadership position, and the last leader, the last boss, had done a terrible job of managing things. And the workers didn't show up on time, they had bad attitudes, and you had to work in and kind of create a new culture and fix this problem. You didn't start the problem, but it was your job to clean it up. Customers left bad reviews, and it was just a mess. Or maybe in a very real sense, maybe you were actually in charge of someone's estate. Someone in your life passed away and you were the executor, and you had to go in and kind of sort through their bills and their debts and figure out who they owed money to, and maybe you had to liquidate their assets, and it could be a stressful time as well. Maybe you've been in a relationship, and after you were in it for a while, you realized that the other person in the relationship had a lot of baggage, and through faithful love and patience, and you were able to sort through some of those things. One of the reasons that I love our church, and I love being a pastor of the Commonplace, is that with a number of you, we started this together, 9 years ago. And so when we started church, you get the chance to create your own culture. You get to kind of dream what it's going to look like. And any problems that happen are probably my own problems, right? My own mismanagement. I didn't move into here and adopt somebody else's problems. It's one of the reasons that ever becoming the pastor of an established existing church is kind of terrifying to me. The thought of going in and having to deal with problems that I didn't create. My dad just finished up a whole year, he's about to, of being what they call an intentional interim pastor, where there was a church that had serious problems, and they just went through pastor after pastor, and there was deep places of bitterness in their church, and his job was to go in there for 1 year and by the power of God's Spirit, fix the place. And that's just a terrifying prospect, right? And yet, through a lot of love and patience, he was able to work through all of the hurts that this church had experienced and help to bring them to a place of health so that when they get their new pastor, the permanent pastor, they'll be in a much better place. And so maybe some of you have experienced this idea of being in a job or in a position where you have to deal with some mess that wasn't yours you didn't create it. You know, David understands this, and so it kind of helps set the stage for this passage today of David saying, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. I just want us to kind of briefly kind of overview David's journey from shepherd to king, because it was a messy journey and things did not go smoothly. If you remember, when David is a teenager, probably 17, somewhere around there, he is anointed to be the king of Israel. He's a shepherd. He's just the youngest son of Jesse. And Samuel, the prophet, comes and anoints him and says, God's put a calling on your life. The Holy Spirit comes on David, and he says, you're going to be king someday. But it doesn't happen right away. Instead, we find that David moves into a position in the kingdom of working for the existing king, King Saul. And that goes well for a few years until David goes and kills Goliath. And suddenly, he's very popular, and Saul becomes very, very jealous. And then, so after being kind of in Saul's favor, all of a sudden, Saul is jealous of David, and Saul spends the next 7 years or so chasing David all over the Middle East, trying to kill him. It's just a miserable time. And during this season of David's life, he collects a band of people around him. I just want to read to you in 1 Samuel 22, 1-2, the kinds of people that made up David's team. All right? David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down to him there, which makes sense. His poor family went from being the parents of the most popular guy in Israel, the Goliath, the giant slayer, to being the parents of the most wanted man in Israel. That's probably a terrible shift to happen. And so they left their home to go live with David, probably for security reasons. And then, listen to this, and everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him, and he became commander over them, and there were about 400, and there were with him about 400 men. Imagine if you're going to start I can only imagine it, 9 years ago when I was going to start a church and a coffee shop. These were my criteria. If you want to join my church planting team, I need you to be in debt, bitter, in distress, just generally miserable. If you're miserable, come and join me. And that's the team that David assembles around himself, and this motley crew just runs around for years trying to avoid being killed by Saul. Well, eventually there is a battle in which Saul is eventually killed. And at this moment, finally, for the very first time, David becomes king. But he's only king of Judah. In fact, I've got a map up here I want to show you guys. All right? So if you look here, you got Judah down here at the bottom, and there's a place called Hebron. And David becomes king, but he's only king of one tribe, of many tribes. And over top of them is Israel, all the other tribes. And king over them is Saul's son Ishbosheth. And so even when you would think, finally, Saul's great enemy Saul has died, now finally David can receive the kingdom, he can be established as king, now's the time. We only find him being partly in charge of the nation of Israel. He's in charge of Judah, one tribe, it's a very large tribe, but not over all of Israel. And to make matters worse, for the next 7.5 years, there's a bitter civil war. I mean, the country, Judah and Israel, fight against themselves. They're not just fighting the Philistines and the Amorites and the Amalekites, the surrounding armies, but they actually fight against each other. And you can imagine, what a more terrible way to try to establish your kingdom than being in a battle with the people you will someday be in charge of. What a terrible season of difficulty in his life. Well, 7 years later, the commander of Israel's army, all right, which is, his name was Abner, all right? Abner is in charge of Ishbosheth's army, and eventually Abner gets frustrated with Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth makes some claims about Abner that weren't true, and Abner decides, you know what, it's time to unite the kingdom. I'm going to go get all of the head elders, the leaders of the families, and we're going to kind of form a coup, and we're going to finally turn Israel and Judah into one nation. It's finally a long time is waiting for this unity to happen. And so he meets with David. David's happy to see this take place, and but there's one more hurdle that happens in this story. David's commander, his name is Joab, all right? Joab doesn't like Abner. Well, for good reason. They've been fighting against each other for the last 7.5 years. And so after, I'm going to get these names all confused. After Abner meets with David, Joab sends him a message and says, hey, come on back here. We just want to work out a few details. And so Abner turns around, or Joab turns around, and Abner says, come on over here in this corner and we'll talk. And he runs his sword right into Abner and kills him in cold blood. And you would think, man, finally, just when he's about to get the kingdom, it falls through his fingers once again. But David does something very interesting here. If you were going to take a lesson from a good manager, you'd probably look at David's life here. What he does is, rather than celebrate the death of the man who had chased him for the last 7.5 years, instead he mourns for him. He grieves the loss of this commander. In fact, in 2 Samuel 3:36, we read this: "All the people took notice of it, and it pleased them, as everything that the king did pleased all the people." So I think in this moment, David is starting to build some bridges here, starting to make some inroads into the hearts and the lives of the people in the northern kingdom as well. Well, shortly after that, there's another, some guys go and they kill King Ishbosheth in Israel. And again, David doesn't celebrate the fact that his enemy is killed. Instead, he punishes the men who killed this guy. They killed him in cold blood while he was sleeping in his house. They came in and snuck in and took him out. The Old Testament is a pretty bloody book. It's pretty wild. Anyhow, again, David doesn't celebrate, but instead he punishes the killers. And finally, after years and years and years of waiting, David is made over both Judah and Israel. And finally, there's a united kingdom. Finally. It's been, I think at this point, perhaps 15 or more years since David was anointed as a shepherd to when he is finally made king over all of Israel and all of Judah. And I tell you this because if there's anyone to understand what it's like to follow the call of God on his life and be obedient to God's voice, and yet to experience a really long and hard journey with all kinds of valleys and challenges, it's David. When you look at David's life and you reflect on the fact that he wrote the psalm, the part of Psalm 23 where it says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." It's easy to find places in the Bible that illustrate that in David's life. He faced a lot of challenges, a lot of difficulties. He knows what he's talking about. So it might be a little bit of a surprise to read at the conclusion of his psalm that David reflects on his life and he says, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all of the days of my life. He's not complaining about the journey that God sent him on. Doesn't seem to be filled with regret or anger towards God. So what does he mean by this? And I think that there's two possible ways to look at that phrase. One way to look at it is that David is saying that these are attributes of God that he sees as he reflects on his life. That David says, over the last few years of my journey with God, I can consistently see that he was good to me and that he showed mercy to me. In fact, as we face an uncertain future, those are really the only certain things that we can be sure of, is that God's goodness and his mercy will go with us. And that is against the backdrop of trials and difficulties that God's goodness and mercy are best put on display. Here's what I mean by that. If I were to ask you to tell me about a story in your life when God was especially good to you, when you felt God's mercy in a really strong and a powerful way, most of the times the stories that you would tell me would be stories placed against the backdrop of some kind of suffering or pain that you went through. You would say things like, oh, I remember a time that God was so good to me. My family was broke. We couldn't pay our bills. We didn't know how we were going to get groceries that week. And yet God provided in this amazing way. He did a miracle. Or you'd say, there was this time in my life when our marriage was just a mess. It was on the rocks. I didn't know if we were going to make it another year as a couple. And yet God intervened and he showed mercy to us. And he has, put our relationship on a solid place. Or my life was a mess. I couldn't stay in a healthy relationship. I was struggling with substance abuse. My life was just a disaster. But God stepped in because he is good and he is full of mercy. And he rescued me. And so I think David can reflect on the trials of his life, and against the backdrop of that, he sees most clearly the faithfulness and the goodness of God. Most of the times when things are going well and it's smooth sailing, we're less likely to reflect on God's goodness and mercy. He seems to shine the brightest when the situation is the darkest. And so I think it's a fair assessment to say that this could be what David is saying. When I reflect on my life and the journey that God's taken me on, I see over and over again moments when He intervened in my life and protected me and kept me safe and did amazing miracles. And this gives us reason to pause and reflect with gratitude towards God. It gives us courage to face the future, because maybe right now you're in another dark place. These words remind us that the God who was faithful to you before is going to continue to be faithful to you in the future. So I just want that promise to wash over you, that God is still a God of mercy and goodness in whatever season of life you're facing, and He's going to bring you through that. Another application or another interpretation of this that could very well be what David is saying is that David is saying, I want goodness and mercy to be my legacy. In other words, as I reflect on my life, I want my story to be one of goodness and mercy. I want, when people tell the story of David, tell me about David, they're going to say, oh, he was a good king. He was a merciful king. So it's not necessarily the interaction of God with David, but rather the way in which David lived out his life with others. And the reason I kind of come to this conclusion is because David has been on this theme of talking about sheep. He's been conveying that he is like a sheep and God is his good shepherd. And as I studied about sheep, I've learned all kinds of things recently. But one of the most fascinating things about sheep is they have fantastic poop. All right? Bet you didn't expect to learn about that today, right? Sheep manure is great for the earth. All right? It's one of the best fertilizers that you can come across. In fact, as I studied this, one shepherd who wrote a book kind of interpreting this passage says that a well-managed flock of sheep can go into a desolate pasture. They will eat the invasive species, the thistles, the things that no farmer wants on the land, and over a number of years, they will reclaim the land. This desolate pasture that you couldn't grow anything in, under a well-managed flock, will actually restore it and turn it into a place of flourishing. And it can clean up a ravaged place of land as no other creature can do. They eat the food that no farmer wants, they eat the species that no farmer wants around, and they leave behind great manure. Let's pray. No. So, what's our application from that today? When people think of David, and when people think of you, what will come to their mind? I think in David's life, he's starting to understand this as he matures as a follower of God. We see this in the way that he treated his enemies. When they died, he mourned their death. He built bridges. On a number of occasions in David's life, he refused to kill Saul. When the opportunity was presented to him as Saul was chasing him all around, he refused to kill him. We learned a few weeks ago when Sam preached that one of the things that he did is he invited Saul's grandson, Mephibosheth, to come and be a part of his group, to eat at his table. And it was one of the ways that he united a broken kingdom. So while David certainly fought a lot of battles, and war was a huge part of his life, he did a lot of things to kind of bring about peace as well. So the question I ask myself, and you can ask yourself, is what do you leave behind? Do you leave peace or turmoil? Do you leave forgiveness or bitterness? Do you leave contentment or conflict? When you look at the story of your life, and you look at the relationships that you're a part of, and you look at the legacy that you are leaving, are you leaving behind fertile pasture? Like, are you taking difficult situations and then leaving them in a better space than when you entered into them? Maybe some of you have looked at the landscape of your life and have wondered, why on earth has God put you there? I can only imagine that's what David experienced for those 7 years as Saul is chasing him around during a time of a divided kingdom in a civil war. David had to ask himself, what on earth are you doing with my life right now, God? And let me just even present a more radical scenario. Is it possible that the Good Shepherd might move you into a challenging place, a difficult job situation, a rough part of town, a dysfunctional public arena, government, or a nonprofit group, for the very purpose of being part of God's redemptive process? Could it be that in His sovereignty, He knows that you're a sheep, and you've got great manure, right? And He sees broken places in the world and says, I'm going to put my flock there so that over the long haul they will renew the land and make it a fertile place where my kingdom can flourish and great things can happen. Sometimes we look around the landscape of our lives and we get frustrated and angry at God, and we see other pastures that are healthy and they're great and we want to be there, right? The grass is always greener on the other side. And yet, rather than taking that perspective, maybe we should take the fact that we find ourselves in difficult spots as an indication that God sees potential in you to be a change maker in the place that He's put you. God, as a good shepherd, is looking at the places of our city and Lock Haven, and He providentially puts His sheep in those places to be His agents of goodness and mercy. God doesn't put you in these places as some form of discipline. Go learn your lesson, and then whenever you get yourself figured out, then I'll move you to the good pasture. Sometimes He puts us in those places to change the culture around us in a way that reflects His love. This is an idea that Jesus teaches. In fact, as He leads His disciples to go to heaven, and He gives them the great commandment, He very specifically outlines for them some areas He wants them to go. He says, I want you guys to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, that was their hometown, Judea, that's the southern part of the kingdom. And then He says, and take the message of God's news to Samaria. And in the days of Jesus, Samaria was like the armpit of Israel. Nobody wanted to be there. They were a place of social outcasts. They were the objects of severe racial hatred. Samaria was geographically identified as an area that you just avoided at all costs. It was a blighted and distressed place. Generation after generational devastation had occurred there. And Jesus says to His disciples, I want you to go to that place, and I want you to bring my message of hope there. And I think sometimes that the Samarias of our lives, those unwanted pastures, are the least likely places that God's people want to go. We understand what it's like to go as missionaries to other parts of the world. We understand what it's like to love our neighbor. But we don't always understand what it's like to go to the desolate places around us and be a kind of people that bring about change and hope. You know, as I reflected on this passage, I came to the conclusion that maybe this isn't an either-or interpretation. Maybe it's not either David means that God has shown him mercy and goodness, or maybe it means that David will live a life of goodness and mercy, but maybe it's a because situation. In other words, it's because we've received goodness and mercy in our lives. It's because of that we are then able to be agents of goodness and mercy. Philip Keller, he's the shepherd that told me all about sheep manure in his book. He writes this, and I thought this was a profound quote. He says, if I am unable to forgive and extend friendship to fallen men and women, then it is quite certain I know little or nothing in a practical sense of Christ's forgiveness and mercy to me. You see, the goodness and the mercy of God is what informs our actions. We demonstrate goodness and mercy to the extent that we have received goodness and mercy. To the extent that God has forgiven us, that's what drives us to forgive others. And as a church body, there's certainly personal application here, but I want us to ask ourselves as a church, as a commonplace, collectively, where is God calling us to next? Because it is so easy as a church, as we grow, to move to a place of comfort and security, to put up walls that kind of connect us and protect us, and move to a place of affluence, rather than asking ourselves, where do we go next? Where are the desolate places around us? Where is it? Where the pasture here is getting healthy, where are the broken places that God wants to send us to next? What's the segment of our town? What's the people group? What's the area that need the gospel message? And how can we be change makers in those places? What's the place that nobody wants to go? Because that's where God sends His sheep. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up and lead us in a song. Today is our Communion Sunday at the Common Place, and we're going to hand out bread and juice to all of you. I'll ask that you just hold on to those elements until everybody's been served, and then together we will eat and drink in remembrance of what Jesus has done for us. But as this is taking place, I encourage you to ask yourself, what are the places God might be sending you to go to? How can you be a change maker? How can you take a desolate pasture and turn it into something beautiful by the grace of God? And after everyone's been served, we'll eat and drink together.